This is a bit dated, isn't it? Brenda held my little porcelain bluebird up to the light, pinching it between her thumb and forefinger. Its delicate wings, which my late husband George always said matched my eyes, looked fragile in her grasp. The afternoon sun from the living room window caught the glaze, making it shine. George gave that to me on our 20th anniversary, I said. My voice was quiet. That's sweet, she said, her tone making it clear she thought the opposite. My son, Mark, came over and put his arm around her. Brenda's got a great eye, Mum. We're just trying to freshen the place up for you. Freshen it up. It felt more like they were erasing me. She didn't wait for my answer, just started wrapping the bird in old newspaper from the recycling bin. She thought she was just packing away an old trinket. She had no idea she had just declared war. They moved on to the bookshelves next. The whole living room smelled of old paper and leather, the scent of my husband's entire life. Mark stood in front of the shelves George had built with his own hands, patting a stack of history books. "We've got to do something about all these, Mum," he said. "They're just collecting dust." Brenda nodded, looking at the wall with a hungry expression. "Think of all the space we could make. A nice big flat-screen TV could go right here." She measured the space with her hands. Mark started pulling books off the shelves. He made two piles on the floor, a small one to keep, and a much larger one to donate. He was tossing out the books with George's notes scribbled in the margins. It felt like he was tossing out my husband all over again. "Don't you worry, Mom," Mark said, not looking at me. "Brenda and I will handle everything from now on." The words were meant to sound kind, but they landed like a jail sentence. I was sitting in my old floral armchair, the one they hated, when Mark came in with the mail. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. He didn't hand the stack to me. "Let me just sort through this for you, Mum," he said, flipping through the envelopes right there on the coffee table. "No need for you to worry about bills and junk mail." He made two piles, one for him, one for the trash. I watched the familiar blue and white window of my bank statement go into his pile. Then, quick as a snake, he folded it and slid it into the back pocket of his jeans. He thought I didn't see. That was his first mistake. I see everything. He paused on a thick envelope from my pension administrator, his thumb tracing the logo. I held my breath, waiting to see which pile it would land in. Brenda walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The sharp, chemical smell of her lemon soap followed her. She leaned over Mark's shoulder, her eyes fixed on the envelope. "Is that the pension statement?" she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Good. We need to see exactly what the monthly payout is." Mark nodded, turning the envelope over in his hands. "And the Social Security, too. We have to make a budget." They spoke about my money as if I were a leaky faucet that needed managing. My hands were steady around my warm teacup, but inside, a cold anger was starting to build. They weren't planning for my future. They were planning for theirs, with my money. Brenda looked over at me and gave a tight little smile. "It's a good thing we're here to manage all this, Eleanor. It can be so confusing for people your age." A week later, a small tickle in my throat had turned into a deep, rattling cough. The sound echoed in the too quiet house. I tried to smother it with a pillow at night, but it was no use. "Mum, that cough sounds terrible," Mark said from the doorway of my bedroom. He didn't come in. Brenda stood behind him, her arms crossed over her chest. "You really need to see a doctor. We can't have you getting seriously ill." Their voices were a perfect blend of fake concern and real annoyance. My sickness was an inconvenience, a delay in their schedule of organizing my life away. Brenda walked over to the phone on the hall table. "I'm calling Dr. Miller's office. We'll get you an appointment." She didn't ask me. She told me. I wasn't a person to them anymore. I was a problem to be solved, a box to be checked. As Brenda waited on the line, I heard her say in a low, serious voice, "Yes, it's for my mother-in-law. We're very worried about her, and her ability to manage on her own." The cough settled deep in my chest and wouldn't leave. It turned into pneumonia, and before I knew it, I was in a hospital bed with an IV drip in my arm. The sheets were starchy and smelled of bleach. The only other sound was the quiet hum of the machines beside me. Brenda came to visit, not with flowers, but with a thick catalogue for new sofas. She flipped through the glossy pages right there in my room. The bright colours of the furniture seemed wrong against the pale green walls. "Just getting some ideas for the future," she said brightly, tapping a picture of a large grey sectional. "This would look wonderful with a big bay window, don't you think?" I closed my eyes. A cold dread washed over me that had nothing to do with my fever. It was a chill that settled deep in my bones, colder than any winter night. I felt so weak the next day. The doctor came and went, his words a soft blur like a radio playing in another room. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed, and I just wanted to sleep. Mark came in later, his shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum floor. He sat in the visitor's chair and took my hand. His felt cool and dry. "Just rest, Mom," he said, patting my knuckles. "We've got this. Don't you worry about a thing." His voice was meant to be comforting, but it felt like he was tucking me in for the last time. I was too tired to argue, too tired to even open my eyes. I let my breathing become slow and even. I heard them get up and walk over to the window, thinking I was finally asleep. The afternoon sun was coming through the blinds, making stripes of light on the floor. I heard Mark whisper, his voice low and conspiratorial. "It's just a matter of time, Brenda. The doctors are being kind, but you can see it." I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then I heard Brenda's voice, even quieter. "Did you get the measurements for the master bedroom curtains? I saw some fabric I liked online." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud. It was a deep, silent crack. The fever in my blood was nothing compared to the fire that ignited in my chest. It burned away the fog, the weakness, the sadness. In that moment, lying perfectly still in that sterile room, my purpose became as clear and sharp as a shard of glass. The next morning, when the nurse came in with my breakfast tray, I was sitting up. The tray held a small bowl of watery oatmeal and a plastic cup of orange juice. "I'm feeling much better today, dear," I told her. And I was surprised to find it was true. I ate every last bite of that terrible oatmeal. I drank all the juice. "Could you do me a favor?" I asked when she came to take the tray. "I'd like a notepad and a pen, if it's not too much trouble." She looked surprised, but smiled, and came back a few minutes later with a small yellow legal pad and a blue ballpoint pen. The plastic of the pen felt solid in my hand. I started making a list. My handwriting was shaky, but every letter I formed felt like laying a stone for a new foundation. Mark and Brenda visited that afternoon. I had brushed my hair and put on a fresh hospital gown. I was sitting up against the pillows, the yellow notepad on the blanket beside me. The room smelled of antiseptic, but I smiled as they walked in. "I think I'm turning a corner," I said, my voice quiet but steady. For a split second I saw it. A flicker of disappointment that crossed both their faces before they could hide it. It was gone in an instant, replaced by wide, plastered-on smiles. "Mum, that's wonderful news," Mark boomed, a little too loudly. Brenda rushed to my side to fluff my pillow, but I had seen it, and in that moment I saw them for exactly who they were. Not my concerned son and his helpful wife. They were just two people waiting for me to die so they could pick out new curtains. When I finally got back home, the house smelled different. It smelled like Brenda's lemon cleaner, a sharp, chemical scent that covered up the familiar smell of old books and dried roses. She had rearranged the throw pillows on my sofa. It was a small thing, but it felt like an invasion. My own home was becoming a place where I was just a guest. That afternoon, while Brenda was at the grocery store, I went into my husband, George's old study. The leather on his chair was cool to the touch. I opened the top drawer of his desk, just needing to feel something that was still mine. Tucked in the back, behind a stack of old stamps, was a business card. It was for a financial advisor, a Mr. Chen. George had always said, "This man is honest, Eleanor. That's a rare thing." I slipped the card into the pocket of my house dress. Later that night, I hid it between the pages of my favorite gardening book, the one about climbing roses. A tiny thrill went through me, the first spark of warmth I'd felt in weeks. It was the feeling of a secret. The next Tuesday, I told Brenda I needed some fresh air. I walked the 6 blocks to the public library. The air inside was still and smelled of paper and dust. I sat down at one of the computers, the old monitor humming loudly. My fingers felt clumsy on the keyboard. I slowly typed the words. How to revoke power of attorney. The screen filled with legal websites and articles. I clicked on one and started reading. The words were small, but the message was big. The papers Mark had me sign last year, when he said it was just in case, could be undone. It required a notary and a new document. It was possible. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong I felt dizzy. "Are you finding everything you need, Eleanor?" a soft voice asked. It was Patty, the librarian. She was a sweet woman from my church. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I nearly jumped out of my skin. For a wild second, I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to spill the whole ugly story right there under the fluorescent lights. The next day, I went to the grocery store. While Brenda was in the produce aisle comparing heads of lettuce, I walked to the front of the store. There, mounted on the wall by the gumball machines, was an old payphone. My hands trembled as I dug a quarter out of my coin purse. The receiver felt heavy and smelled faintly of stale cigarette smoke. I dialed the number on Mr. Chen's card. A polite secretary answered. I cleared my throat. "I'd like to make an appointment with Mr. Chen, please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's a confidential matter." She found a spot for me the following Thursday. When I hung up, my heart was hammering against my ribs. They were planning my funeral. I decided to plan my future instead. On Thursday morning, I put on my good navy blue dress, the one I saved for church holidays. "I'm off to the ladies' auxiliary meeting at the church," I told Brenda. "We're planning the bake sale." She just nodded, her eyes on a home decorating magazine. "Don't be late for lunch, Mom," she said. I didn't go to the church. I took a taxi to a tall glass building downtown. Mr. Chen's office was on the 12th floor. He was a kind, older gentleman with a gentle smile. He brought me a cup of tea in a real china cup and listened. He just listened. I told him everything. The whispers in the hospital, the sofa catalogue, the way they looked at my bank statements. He never once interrupted or made me feel foolish. When I was finished, he nodded slowly. "Eleanor," he said, his voice calm, "you need more than a financial advisor. You need an excellent lawyer." He wrote a name and number on a crisp sheet of paper and slid it across the polished desk. "Her name is Miss Albright. She's the best. Ms. Albright's office did not have a cosy feel. It was all sharp angles, steel and glass, with a stunning view of the city I rarely visited anymore. Ms. Albright herself was sharp too. She wore a perfectly tailored grey suit, and her eyes missed nothing. I sat across from her, my worn purse in my lap, and told the story again. She didn't offer me tea. She just listened, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "This is not an uncommon situation, I'm afraid," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "We can sort this out quietly and quickly." She slid a thick stack of papers in front of me and explained each one. A revocation of the old power of attorney, a new one appointing her as my agent in an emergency, a new living trust, with me as the only person in control. I picked up the heavy pen. The scratching sound it made as I signed my name was the sound of my old life ending and a new one beginning. Ms. Albright slid a thick piece of paper across her polished desk. The wood smelled faintly of lemon oil. "Here it is," she said. "The original deed to your house. In your name, Eleanor. Free and clear since 2005. I picked it up. The paper felt heavy and important in my hands. "My husband, George, always said to pay off the house first, before anything else. He was a smart man," she said, her voice kind but firm. "This document means you hold all the cards, Eleanor. No one can make decisions about this property but you." As she spoke, my purse buzzed on the leather chair beside me. The little screen lit up with a picture of Brenda, smiling a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I let it buzz and buzz, until the screen went dark and the office was quiet again. Back home, I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed. The scent of my past rose up to meet me, dried lavender and old memories. I carefully gathered my important documents. My passport, with its terrible deer-in-the-headlights photo. My birth certificate, soft as cloth. My social security card, and the papers for George's pension. I packed them all into my large handbag. I realized they were waiting for just one more document to add to their pile. My death certificate. For months, I had been a problem to be managed. Now, I thought, I am a person with a plan. The next morning, I told Brenda I had a doctor's appointment. Instead, I took the bus to a different bank, one on the other side of town. I rented a small, safe deposit box. The teller gave me 2 small, shiny keys. The cold metal box slid out of the wall with a heavy, satisfying sound. I placed my papers inside and locked it up tight. Each item I secured felt like a brick in my new foundation. My first small test came that afternoon. Brenda arrived, unannounced as usual, holding a handful of fabric swatches in shades of grey and beige. The air conditioner hummed, trying to fight the summer heat. "Eleanor, this old thing has got to go," she said, patting the arm of my comfortable floral armchair. It was the chair George and I had picked out together. "I found a lovely grey recliner online. It would be so much better for your back." I took a slow breath. My heart gave a little flutter. "No, thank you, Brenda," I said. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I like it just the way it is." Brenda's smile froze on her face. Mark looked up from his phone, his eyebrows raised. The silence in the room was so thick you could have spread it on toast. My hand rested on the familiar, worn, floral pattern. It was just a chair. But it was my chair. And my no had landed in the middle of the room like a stone. The next day, I called Martha from my old bridge club. She was a widow, like me, but she'd gotten her real estate license a few years back and was doing quite well. We met at the Daily Grind, a little coffee shop downtown that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. "Eleanor," she said, wrapping her hands around her mug. It's been too long? What's on your mind? I stirred my tea, watching the little whirlpool go round and round. I'm considering selling the house, Martha. She raised an eyebrow, but to her credit, she didn't ask why. She just nodded. Well, it's a seller's market. Prices are high. I can prepare a market analysis for you, see what it's worth. She leaned in a little closer. We can keep it just between us for now. I would appreciate that, I said, feeling the warmth of the cup seep into my hands. She promised to have the numbers for me by the end of the week. Suddenly, my quiet little plan started to feel very, very real. I left the brochure for the Shady Pines retirement community on the coffee table. I did it on purpose. I was knitting a simple dishcloth when Mark came over that evening. The television was murmuring about a game show in the background. "What's this, Mum?" he asked, picking up the glossy pamphlet like it was a dead mouse. The brochure showed smiling seniors playing shuffleboard. "Just looking at options," I said calmly. I kept my eyes on my knitting, but my heart was doing a tap dance against my ribs. The metallic click of my needles was the only sound for a moment. "Options," he said, his voice flat. "We're your option." He didn't say it with love. He said it like a statement of fact, as if he owned the deed to me, too. He put the brochure down and looked at me. Really looked at me. It wasn't with concern anymore. It was with a new, calculating suspicion. I spent my afternoons at the public library, where the air hummed with the quiet whir of computers and smelled faintly of old paper and floor polish. I told Mark and Brenda I was joining a book club. I was, in a way. I was reading the whole world on that computer screen. One rainy Tuesday, I clicked on a documentary. It was about a sea turtle conservatory in Costa Rica. I watched the volunteers, their faces earnest and tanned, as they gently measured the giant mother turtles in the dark. They moved the precious eggs to a safe hatchery, their hands careful in the sand. I saw the tiny hatchlings scrambling toward the sea, a mad dash for life under a rising sun. My late husband, George, and I had always talked about going there. We had a brochure for it tucked inside our old atlas. A beautiful, bold idea began to form in my mind, an idea that felt less like an ending and more like a beginning. A few days later, a thick manila envelope arrived. It didn't come with the regular mail. The realtor, a kind woman from my old bridge club, dropped it off herself. I waited until Brenda left after her daily check-in to open it. The report was printed on heavy, crisp paper. I ran my finger over the number at the bottom of the page. The house, my simple house filled with George's books and my worn-out floral armchair, was worth more than I had ever imagined. I called the realtor. "I'm ready," I told her, my voice much steadier than my hands. She came over that same afternoon with the listing agreement. I signed my name, Eleanor Vance, on the dotted line. The pen felt heavy and powerful. "When does the sign go up?" I asked. She smiled. "We can do it Friday morning, if you like." I nodded. Friday would be perfect. Friday morning, I made a pot of strong coffee and sat on my porch swing. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and my neighbour's blooming azaleas. At exactly 9 o'clock, a clean white truck pulled up to the curb. A young man got out, pulled a sign from the back, and walked onto my lawn. He took out a small sledgehammer. I watched him position the post right in the centre of the grass. Then came the sound. Thud, thud, thud. Each strike was firm, final. The "for sale" sign stood straight and proud against the blue sky. That quiet thud of the hammer driving the post into my own yard was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I knew the phone would ring any minute. It didn't take long. My little flip phone buzzed on the wicker table beside me. The screen read, Mark. I took a deep breath and answered. I didn't even have a chance to say hello. What have you done? He screamed, his voice tinny and cracking with rage. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Good morning, Mark. I've decided to sell my house, I said, my voice as calm as the morning air. He sputtered. I could hear Brenda in the background, asking what was wrong. You can't. We had plans. We had plans for this house, he yelled. I looked at the new sign on my lawn. Yes, I said quietly. I have plans. He must have passed the phone to Brenda, because suddenly her high, wailing voice was in my ear. Eleanor, how could you? After everything we've done for you. We picked out the new kitchen tiles, the grey ones with the little flecks you said were nice. She was actually crying over tiles for a kitchen that was not hers. That's a shame, Brenda, I said, and I meant it. It was a shame she had wasted her time. I hope you can get a refund. Then I did something I hadn't done in 30 years. I hung up on them. I pressed the red button and the line went dead. The silence that followed was glorious. They showed up an hour later. I saw Mark's car pull into the driveway, fast and angry. The doorbell rang, a long, insistent buzz that rattled my nerves. Then came the pounding. I stood in the hallway, my hand on the wall to steady myself, and listened to the solid oak of my front door absorb the blows. Mom, open this door right now. Mark's voice was muffled but furious. I walked to the door, my slippers silent on the rug. I didn't touch the lock. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood for a second, gathering my strength. Mark, I said, my voice surprisingly firm. I am not having this conversation. Please leave my property. Mum, what is wrong with you? Open the door. Brenda's voice was a high-pitched shriek. There is nothing to discuss, I said. Please go home. I heard them muttering. Then Mark's voice rose to a full-throated yell, a sound I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. You'll regret this. You're not legally competent. My hand flew to my mouth, but I didn't make a sound. The words hung in the air, a threat and a promise. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely dial the number. I sat in my floral armchair, the one Brenda wanted to throw out, and listened to the phone ring. Ms. Albright answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp as a starched collar. Eleanor, is everything all right? She asked. I told her what Mark had shouted through the door. I told her about the pounding and the yelling. The air conditioner hummed softly as I spoke, a calm counterpoint to the panic in my chest. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just the faint scratch of a pen on paper. I see, she finally said. Don't you worry about a thing. I'll be sending them a cease and desist letter this afternoon. She explained it would tell them I was her client, that I was fully competent, and that any attempt to contact me directly would be considered harassment. When I hung up, I felt a profound sense of relief. It was as if she had handed me a suit of armor, invisible but strong. That piece of paper was a shield, and for the first time, I felt truly safe in my own home. The house sold in 2 days. My realtor, Betty, called me while I was watering my begonias. The sun was warm on my back, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Eleanor, are you sitting down? She asked, her voice fizzing with excitement. I'm standing in my garden, Betty. What is it? We have a cash offer, for $20,000 over your asking price. I nearly dropped the hose. I sat down hard on the porch steps, the concrete cold through my slacks. A cash offer meant no banks, no appraisals, just a quick and clean sale. They want to close in 2 weeks. Betty added. 2 weeks. It felt like the world had suddenly tilted and was spinning much, much faster. The speed of it all was dizzying. I looked at my little house, the place George and I had built a life, and felt a pang of sadness. But it was followed by a jolt of pure, exhilarating freedom. My life was about to change completely, and it was happening now. I hired a company called Gentle Transitions to help me sort through 50 years of my life. 2 kind, patient women came and didn't rush me. We went through every room, every closet, every drawer. I touched my wedding dress, brittle with age, and the tiny sweaters I knit for Mark when he was a baby. Keep, donate, or discard? One of the women, named Maria, would ask softly. I kept only what was truly precious. My photo albums, George's collection of poetry books, their pages worn and soft, and the little porcelain bird Brenda had tried to banish to the attic. I wrapped it myself in bubble wrap and placed it in a small box labelled Important. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the lifetime of accumulated things, I had them take to a local women's shelter. Watching the truck pull away, filled with my old life, didn't feel like a loss. It felt like I was making room for something new. Closing day was grey and overcast. I sat in a sterile conference room at the title company. The air smelled of coffee and photocopier toner. I signed my name over and over again on a mountain of papers, my hand steady. The young man from the title company smiled politely, pointing to each signature line. "And that's the last one," he said, taking the pen from me. I watched him type on his computer. There was a series of quiet clicks. "Okay, the wire transfer is complete," he announced. "The funds are now in your account." Just like that, 50 years of a mortgage, of memories, of life, turned into a number on a screen. I picked up my purse, which suddenly felt heavier. As I walked out into the damp air, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt since George died. It wasn't about the money. It was about the knowing. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was in control of my own life again. I walked out of the title company office, and the city air felt different. The hum of the air conditioner in the building faded, replaced by the sound of traffic and a distant siren. My purse felt heavy, but it wasn't the checkbook inside. It was the weight of the decision. I didn't go to my car. Instead, I walked 2 blocks down to a small travel agency I remembered from years ago. The little bell above the door jingled. A young woman with bright pink hair looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I need a one-way ticket to San Jose, Costa Rica." She raised an eyebrow just a little. "A new adventure?" "You could say that," I told her. After I paid for the ticket, I went to my new bank. I filled out the wire transfer form. My hand didn't shake as I wrote out the name, the Costa Rican Sea Turtle Conservatory. I pushed the paper across the cool marble counter to the teller. The largest transaction of my life was done with a few quiet clicks of a keyboard. The next morning, I went to the post office. I slid a large manila envelope across the counter. Inside was a copy of the wire transfer receipt and a glossy photograph of a baby turtle scrambling across the sand. Nothing else. No letter. No explanation. "I need this sent by certified mail," I told the clerk. "It needs a signature." "Of course," he said, stamping the forms with a satisfying thud. He slid the green and white receipt back to me. I tucked it into my purse. I imagined Brenda signing for it, her hands freshly manicured. I imagined Mark tearing it open, his face turning that blotchy red colour it gets when he's furious. I felt nothing at all. The plane door opened in San Jose, and a wall of warm, wet air hit my face. It smelled of damp earth and flowers I didn't know the names of. Spanish words swirled around me, fast and musical. For a moment, standing there with my one small suitcase, a wave of pure terror washed over me. I was 72 years old, in a country where I knew no one, and I could barely ask for the bathroom. A man with a kind face held a sign that said Conservatorio. He smiled when I walked toward him. "Eleanor?" he asked. "Si," I said, the only word I could manage. He took my bag and led me to an old van. As we drove out of the city, the buildings gave way to lush green hills. For the first time, maybe since George died, my life was entirely my own. I had no idea what I was doing. We arrived at the conservatory as the sun was setting. It wasn't fancy. Just a few simple buildings nestled between the jungle and the sound of the ocean. A group of people sat at a long wooden table outside, and they all looked up and smiled. There were young students with sunburned noses and a few older people like me. A woman with a long grey braid came over and gave me a hug. "Welcome, Eleanor. I'm Maria, the director. We are so grateful to have you." "I'm glad to be here," I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. They showed me to my room. It was small, with just a bed, a fan that hummed quietly, and a window that looked out at the sea. I could already smell the salt in the air. My first real job was not glamorous. I was given a bucket and a stiff brush and shown a row of large tanks holding injured sea turtles. My task was to scrub the algae off the sides. The sun was hot on my back, and the work made my shoulders ache. It was messy and smelled like a swamp. I loved every minute of it. A young man working on the next tank grinned at me. "Tough work, eh?" "It's the best work I've done in years," I said, scrubbing harder. That evening, I used the spotty Wi-Fi in the main building to check my new email address. There was only one message. The subject line read, "Urgent from your son." I looked at it for a long moment. Then I moved my cursor over the little trash can icon and clicked. I learned the names of the turtles first. The loggerhead, the green, the hawksbill. I repeated them to myself as I scrubbed the inside of the big saltwater tanks. The rhythmic scrape of the brush against the algae was calming. It was honest work. A young volunteer, a college girl named Chloe, came by. "You're missing a spot, Eleanor," she said, pointing with a chin that knew everything. Her tone was the exact same one Brenda used when she'd point out dust on my bookshelves. For a moment, the humid air felt like the stuffy air of my old living room. I stopped scrubbing and looked at the girl. "Thank you, dear. I'll get to it when I'm good and ready." She blinked, surprised, and walked away. I took a deep breath. The air here smelled of salt and life, not lemon polish and resentment. The daily rhythm of the work and the ocean was healing something in me, but the scar was still tender. Every time I felt a moment of peace, I remembered what I'd paid for it. I wondered if Mark had tried to access our old joint account yet. I made my first friend while hauling buckets of sand to reinforce the hatchery walls. Her name was Sophia, a retired teacher from Argentina with kind eyes and hands as wrinkled as my own. We didn't have many words in common at first. We communicated with nods, smiles, and the shared ache in our backs. One afternoon, sitting on an overturned bucket, she pointed at the locket I wear with George's picture. "Familiar?" she asked. "Mi esposo," I said, "my husband." I touched the worn silver. She smiled, then made a gesture like rocking a baby. "Hijos?" "Children?" The question hung in the hot, still air. "I have a son," I said, and the words came out flat and hard. I didn't say his name. He felt like a person from another life, a character in a sad book I had finished reading. Sophia just nodded, as if she understood everything I wasn't saying. Some families you are born into. Others, you build one bucket of sand at a time. I wondered if she could see the anger still flickering behind my eyes. Twice a week, I walked into the village for a beginner's Spanish class. There were 6 of us, crowded around a small table in the back of the library. Our teacher, a young woman named Isabella, was very patient. "My name is Eleanor," I said, my voice cracking on the unfamiliar vowels. "Yo soy de los Estados Unidos." I am from the United States. It felt strange to say. My old house, my old street, my old life. That wasn't my home anymore. Was this place home? I wasn't sure. Isabella taught us a useful phrase. Lo siento, no entiendo. I'm sorry, I don't understand. I wrote it down carefully in my notebook. I thought of all the times Mark and Brenda had talked about my finances, my health, my future, right in front of me. All the times I should have looked them in the eye and said, "I'm sorry. I don't understand why you think you have a right to this." A wave of loneliness washed over me so sharp it almost took my breath away. For a second, I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. My first night patrol on the beach was a lesson in darkness. The moon was a sliver, and the stars were brighter than I had ever seen them. Mateo, our guide, was a local boy with a quiet voice. "Listen," he whispered. "Not with your ears, with your feet. You will feel her digging." We walked in silence, the surf hissing beside us. The only sound was the rhythmic thump of a loose board on a distant porch. It sounded just like the hammer pounding the "for sale" sign into my lawn. I remembered Mark's voice on the phone, thin and screeching with disbelief. "What have you done?" I remembered the beautiful, perfect silence after I hung up on Brenda's sobs. This wasn't peace I was feeling under the stars. It was something harder, colder. It was the feeling of a debt being paid. In the deep shadows by the tree line, I thought I heard someone call my name. A man's voice. I spun around, my heart kicking in my chest. But it was only the wind. We found her just after midnight. A massive leatherback turtle, looking ancient and weary, was carving a deep nest in the sand with her huge back flippers. She moved with a slow, determined grace. We kept our distance, using only a dim red light so we wouldn't disturb her. "She is giving everything for her babies," Mateo whispered, his voice full of awe. I thought of Brenda in my hospital room, flipping through a sofa catalogue while I coughed into my pillow. "Just getting some ideas for the future," she had chirped. I watched, mesmerized, as the turtle laid her clutch of white, leathery eggs. It felt like I was witnessing something holy. After she had covered the nest and dragged herself back to the sea, we moved in. My hands, clumsy in their latex gloves, were surprisingly steady as I gently lifted each egg and placed it in our cooler. We were saving them. We were protecting her legacy from the dangers of the world. Back at the conservatory, a packet of mail forwarded by Ms. Albright was waiting. On top was a postcard with the familiar looping handwriting of my old neighbour, Carol. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was the first news I'd had from the world I had set on fire. A postcard arrived a few weeks later, tucked into a bundle of mail for the conservatory. It had been forwarded by Miss Albright's office, covered in extra stamps. The picture was of the rose garden at our old public library. The handwriting on the back was Carol's, my next-door neighbour for 30 years. "Heard you were on a grand adventure," she wrote in her familiar, loopy script. "The whole neighbourhood is talking, you know. That son of yours made quite a scene. Good for you, Eleanor. We are all so proud of you." I sat on the porch steps, the worn cardboard soft in my hands. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus. I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. I went inside and found a piece of plain paper. I wrote back to her, not about Mark or the house, but about the sound of the ocean at night and the weight of a turtle egg in my palm. It felt good to have a piece of my old life reach me here, like a message in a bottle. The next night, a young volunteer named Leo came running from the hatchery. His face was flushed with excitement. Abuela Elena, he whispered, calling me by the nickname they'd all started using. Come quick, it's happening. We all gathered inside the warm, dark hatchery. It smelled of damp sand and something ancient, like the beginning of the world. In one of the protected nests, the sand was moving. A tiny crack appeared, then another. A small, dark flipper, no bigger than my thumbnail, pushed its way into the air. A hushed silence fell over our group. We stood shoulder to shoulder, a strange little family of strangers, watching a miracle. Someone squeezed my arm gently. All I could hear was the soft scratching of dozens of tiny creatures beginning their journey. The lead biologist looked at us, his eyes shining in the dim light. Get some rest, everyone, he said. We have a very early morning. Before the sun came up, we were on the beach. The sand was cool under my feet, and the sky was a soft, pearly grey. I carried a bucket that was surprisingly heavy, filled with dozens of tiny, scrambling turtles. We all stood in two lines, forming a pathway to the water's edge to protect them from crabs and birds. I knelt down and gently tipped my bucket onto the sand. The little turtles spilled out, hesitating for just a moment before their instincts took over. They scrambled toward the sound of the waves, their little bodies working so hard. One got turned around, and I used my finger to give it a gentle nudge in the right direction. That way, little one, I whispered. Tears streamed down my face as I watched them meet the gentle morning surf. The ocean, so vast and powerful, pulled them in, and they were gone. I had never felt a part of something so large and important. This was a legacy, not a house with new curtains, but this surge of new life heading for home. A few days later, I sat in the small, hot office for my video call. The internet connection flickered, but I could see Ms. Albright clearly in her neat blazer, sitting in her air-conditioned office 1,000 miles away. The sounds of parrots squawking came through my open window. So, just to confirm, Eleanor, she said, her voice crisp and clear. The remainder of your pension and Social Security benefits are to be directed to the Costa Rican Sea Turtle Conservatory upon your death? That's correct, I said. My own voice sounded steady. She looked down at her papers. And there is no mention of your son, Mark, or his wife, Brenda. No, I said, feeling a quiet calm settle over me. There is not. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about choice. I was choosing where the story of my life would end. Ms. Albright looked at me through the screen, her expression unreadable. Are you sure, Eleanor? She asked softly. Once this is filed, it's done. After the call ended, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in the rocking chair on my little porch. The chair creaked with a comforting rhythm. For a moment, I thought about my old house. I thought of the floral armchair Brenda wanted to throw out, and the faint scent of my George's pipe tobacco that always lingered in his study. I realized I didn't miss the building. I didn't miss the furniture or the carpets or the china. I missed my husband. But here, watching the eternal rhythm of the waves, I felt closer to his memory than I ever did in that silent, lonely house. My life was no longer about the things I owned. Brenda had wanted to wrap up my porcelain bird and hide it in the attic. She wanted to put me away, too. I took a slow sip of my coffee, The taste, rich and strong. I had put an entire ocean between me and them, and for the first time, I felt I had all the space in the world to breathe. My 73rd birthday arrived on a Tuesday. I expected nothing. I was just happy to feel the warm sun on my arms as I scrubbed a water trough. Just after lunch, the other volunteers gathered me into the main hut. The air was thick with the smell of cinnamon and sugar. On the long wooden table sat a small cake with a single, sputtering candle. "Happy birthday, Elena!" they shouted. Sophia from Argentina started singing. Then a young man from Germany joined in his language, and soon a girl from Japan was singing in hers. It was a beautiful, jumbled sound. They handed me a slice of the cake, a simple yellow cake with pineapple frosting. I took a bite, and the sweetness filled my mouth. Tears started rolling down my cheeks. "Are you sad?" Sophia asked, putting a warm hand on my shoulder. "No," I said, my voice thick. "I'm just so very happy." This was my family now, a family that celebrated me being alive, not one that measured my rooms for new curtains. The tears were not for what I had lost, but for everything I had found. A few weeks later, I walked to the village market by myself. The stalls were overflowing with bright red mangoes and green limes, and the air hummed with chatter. I needed soap and coffee. I walked up to a woman sitting behind a pyramid of avocados. My heart was thumping like a drum. "Buenos dias," I said, my voice a little shaky. "Quisiera un poco de café, por favor." She smiled, a lovely smile with a gold tooth. She asked me which kind, if I wanted it ground, if I needed anything else, and I understood her. I answered her questions in my slow, careful Spanish. We talked for a full minute. She wrapped the coffee beans in brown paper, and I paid her. I walked away from her stall feeling 10 feet tall. It was a small thing, buying coffee, but it was my victory. It proved that an old dog could learn new tricks, and that I was more than just someone's mother who was taking too long to die. Back at my small cabin, I turned on the old laptop the conservatory kept for volunteers. I had an email from Ms. Albright with some tax documents, and below it, another email. The subject line was just 2 words. "I'm sorry." It was from Mark. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. The hum of the ceiling fan filled the small room. I thought of the hospital, of his whispers by the window. I thought of Brenda's sofa catalogue. I moved the cursor over to the little trash can icon. I clicked it. The email vanished. A quiet calm settled over me. I took a deep breath of the humid air. Forgiveness is not required for me to be at peace. Some doors are meant to stay closed forever. The next month, a new volunteer arrived. He was a college student from Ohio, earnest and a little clumsy, with the same sandy hair Mark had at that age. My breath caught in my chest for a moment when I saw him. The director assigned him to me for his first day, to learn how to clean the juvenile tanks. I could have been cold. I could have been short with him. The old Eleanor might have been. Instead, I showed him how to use the soft, bristled brush. "Go gently," I said. "You don't want to scratch their shells." He dropped the brush twice, splashing algae green water all over his shirt. He looked mortified. "Don't you worry," I told him, handing him a rag. "We've all done it. You'll get the hang of it." He gave me a grateful smile. I had broken the cycle. I would not pass on the bitterness that had been handed to me. Before long, the new arrivals were always sent to me first. The younger volunteers started calling me Abuela Elena, Grandma Eleanor. The first time I heard it, a young woman from France said, "Ask Abuela Elena. She knows where everything is." The name didn't make me feel old. It made me feel respected. It made me feel useful. One evening, I was teaching a new girl how to spot the tracks of a nesting turtle in the sand. "See how it looks like a little tractor went by?" I said, pointing with my flashlight. She nodded, her eyes wide with wonder in the beam of light. "Abuela Elena," she said softly, "this is magical." And I realized that name, given to me by strangers, meant more than the title of mom had in years. I was a grandmother again, but this time it was by choice. I sat with Sophia on the beach. We didn't need to talk. The sun was melting into the ocean, painting the sky in shades of orange and soft purple I never saw back home. The waves sighed against the shore, a steady, calming sound. Sophia dug her toes into the warm sand next to mine. She was a retired schoolteacher from Argentina, with a laugh that could startle birds from the trees. We had spent the afternoon mending nets, our hands moving in a comfortable rhythm. Now there was nothing to do but watch the day end. For years, silence had felt like a heavy blanket of loneliness. I filled it with the noise from the television or the hum of the refrigerator. But here, with Sophia, the silence was different. It was full. It was peaceful. She pointed to a pelican that dove into the water with a clumsy splash. "He is not so graceful," she said in her thick accent. "He gets the job done," I said, and we both chuckled. It was all that needed to be said. I found an old photo of George and me the other day, tucked inside a book he loved. We were standing in front of our old house, the one with the big oak tree. We were so young. I looked at the woman in the picture, the one with the hopeful eyes, and I felt a strange distance. It was like reading a story about someone else, a nice woman who had a nice life for a while. I thought about Mark and Brenda, about their whispers in the hospital room. For so long, the memory had been a hot coal in my chest. But sitting here, with the sound of the ocean and the smell of salt in the air, I realized the coal had finally burned out. It was just a cold, grey ash. The anger was gone. I put the photo back in the book and closed it. I hadn't run away from my life. I had simply walked toward a new one. It wasn't a doctor or a miracle that saved me. I saved myself. A few days later, the conservatory director, a kind man named Matteo, asked to see me. He had a formal-looking letter in his hand, the paper thick and expensive. I felt a little flutter of worry in my stomach. Was there a problem with my visa? "Eleanor," he said, his smile warm. "We have some wonderful news. The board had a meeting." He handed me the letter. My hands shook just a little as I unfolded it. The letterhead was official, with a lovely drawing of a leatherback turtle at the top. I read the words, my eyes scanning the lines. They were building a new, larger hatchery, a place to protect the eggs from predators and high tides. And then I saw our names. They were naming it the George and Eleanor Wing, in our honor. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at Matteo, unable to speak. "My husband," I started, my voice cracking. "He would have loved this." My quiet little act of defiance hadn't just been for me. It had created a legacy of life, that night. I took the late patrol on the beach by myself. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew the sounds of the night creatures and the feel of the path, even in the dark. The moon was a perfect shining circle, and it laid a silver road across the dark water. The air was cool on my skin, and the sand crunched softly under my boots. I walked slowly, my eyes scanning the high tide line for the telltale tracks of a nesting mother. This was my job now. This was my purpose. I wasn't waiting for a phone call. I wasn't waiting for a visit. I wasn't waiting for my life to be over. I was a guardian of this beach, under this big, silent sky. I felt calm and strong, like the old sea turtles themselves. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Just before dawn, I held the last of the hatchlings in my hand. It was a tiny thing, no bigger than my palm, its little flippers already paddling against my skin. It was so fragile, but I could feel the powerful, ancient instinct that drove it. All it wanted was the ocean. It didn't know about the dangers, the long journey, the odds stacked against it. It only knew to move toward the water. I knelt on the damp sand at the edge of the surf. The sky was turning a soft, pearly grey. I lowered my hand, and the little turtle scrambled onto the sand, a dark shape moving instinctively toward the sound of the waves. A small wave washed over it, pulling it back, but it pushed forward again. Then a bigger one came, and the ocean took it. It was gone. I stayed there for a long time, watching the sun rise. Go on, I whispered to the empty ocean. Be free.